The classroom went silent when the professor laughed and said, "Kids like you don't celebrate Christmas in our neighborhood." Every eye turned to the black boy standing alone. His hand still raised, his dignity stripped in front of everyone. No one defended him. No one corrected the teacher. The power imbalance was clear and deliberate. But what they didn't know was that this humiliation would ignite something unstoppable. Because days later, that same boy would expose a truth the school spent decades burying. And everything would begin to fall apart. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The moment unfolded without warning, sharp and public, the kind of moment that rewired a room forever. Jamari Whitfield's hand rose slowly from the third row, fingers steady despite the familiar awareness crawling up his spine. The awareness that came with being seen too clearly, and not clearly enough at the same time. The classroom was decorated for December in a way that felt curated, rather than joyful. White paper snowflakes cut with mathematical precision, a plastic wreath centered above the board, and a faint pine-scented spray that clung to the air, like something artificial trying too hard to be real. Mr. Douglas Cartwright stood near the lectern, chalk dust on his sleeve, delivering a lecture about cultural traditions with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned about belonging. When Jamari cleared his throat and spoke about Christmas at his grandmother's apartment, about music bleeding through thin walls, about mismatched ornaments collected over years, the professor didn't let him finish. Cartwright smiled, thin and amused, and said loudly enough for every student to hear, that kids like Jamari didn't celebrate Christmas in neighborhoods like this. The words landed heavy, deliberate, and absolute. The room responded the way rooms often did when power flexed itself into cruelty. A few students laughed too quickly, the sound brittle and unsure, as if they were checking the temperature of the joke before committing to it. Others avoided Jamari's eyes, staring instead at their notebooks, the decorations, the clock ticking down to the end of the period. Jamari felt the heat rise in his face, not from embarrassment alone, but from something more corrosive, the realization that the insult wasn't accidental. Cartwright's gaze didn't waver. It rested on Jamari with a knowing look, as though he had simply articulated an obvious truth everyone else had been too polite to say. Jamari's mouth opened, then closed. He knew the rules of this place, even if no one had spelled them out for him. Speak when called on. Don't overstep. Don't make people uncomfortable. He had followed those rules from the moment he earned his scholarship into this elite prep school, believing excellence would be enough to earn safety. In that instant, excellence felt like a costume that had slipped. Jamari sank back into his seat, the edges of the desk pressing into his forearms. He stared at the grain of the wood, tracing lines that reminded him of streets back home, uneven, layered, full of stories that never made it into brochures. He thought about his mother working double shifts so he could be here, about his grandmother saving every December to buy a new ornament, even if it meant skipping something else. Christmas wasn't a postcard in his world. It was survival stitched together with laughter and stubborn hope. The professor's comment didn't just insult him. It erased all of that with a sentence. Around him, the class resumed its rhythm. Cartwright continued lecturing about traditions and values, his voice smooth, confident, unchallenged. Jamari noticed how easily the room allowed the insult to dissolve into normalcy, how quickly the moment became his burden alone to carry. From the corner of his eye, Jamari caught a glance from a boy 2 rows over, Ethan, whose family name was etched into the school library wall. Ethan looked conflicted, lips pressed tight, but he didn't say anything. No one did. Silence, Jamari realized, was the currency of this place. It bought comfort for those who already belonged, and isolation for anyone who didn't. He thought about raising his hand again, about correcting the professor, about explaining that Christmas didn't belong to neighborhoods, but to people. The thought died quickly. He had seen what happened to students who were labeled difficult. They didn't get invited to study groups. Their recommendations softened. Their mistakes lingered longer. Jamari was 14, but he understood systems well enough to know when they were closing ranks. The bell finally rang, sharp and liberating, but the damage lingered like an echo. Students filed out, coats rustling, voices rising again, as if nothing had happened. Jamari packed his bags slowly, forcing his hands not to shake. Mr. Cartwright called out his name, voice casual now, almost friendly. Jamari paused, heart pounding, and turned. The professor's expression had softened into something that looked like concern but felt rehearsed. He told Jamari not to take things so personally, that the school valued diversity, but also realism. that sometimes young people misunderstood jokes meant to teach resilience. Jamari nodded because that was what was expected. He nodded because pushing back would only confirm whatever story Cartwright had already written about him. When he left the classroom, the hallway felt colder, brighter, less forgiving. Walking to his locker, Jamari replayed the moment again and again, each time hearing the laughter louder, the words sharper. He wondered if he had imagined the malice, if maybe he really didn't belong here. That doubt was the most dangerous part. It slipped in quietly, wearing the professor's confidence, and tried to convince him that erasure was just another word for reality. Jamari leaned his forehead against the metal of his locker and closed his eyes. He remembered his grandmother's voice telling him that people who shrink your world do it because they're afraid of how big yours can get. He didn't know yet what proving Cartwright wrong would look like, but he knew something inside him had shifted. As Jamari walked out of the building, snow beginning to fall in soft indifferent flakes, he didn't notice Mr. Cartwright standing by the window, watching him leave with an expression that wasn't satisfied but calculating. The professor turned back to his desk and opened a thin folder with Jamari's name typed neatly on the tab, its contents waiting to be added to. Outside, Jamari pulled his coat tighter and kept walking, unaware that the humiliation in that classroom was only the opening move in a much larger game, and that the vow forming silently in his chest was about to collide with forces determined to keep him in his place. The next morning, the school buzzed with talk of the annual Winter Ridge ski retreat, a week-long luxury trip nestled deep in the snow-blanketed Vermont mountains, reserved for students who could afford the $2,500 per head price tag, an amount that made Jamari's stomach twist just hearing it. Flyers plastered the walls, bright and cheerful with images of smiling teens in matching jackets, cabins draped in string lights, and words like "create lifelong holiday memories" printed in bold. Around him, kids talked excitedly about skiing lessons, gourmet hot cocoa, and expensive snow gear their parents had just bought. It wasn't just a trip, it was a rite of passage for the school's social elite. For Jamari, it was another silent reminder of the invisible divide that split the student body clean down the middle. Jamari's scholarship didn't come with access to luxury trips or special outings. His mother had already told him they'd barely have enough for presents this year, let alone an extravagant vacation. "We'll make Christmas special our own way," she had said gently, pressing a $20 bill into his hand, so he could at least buy a few decorations for his dorm space. He hadn't told her how embarrassed he felt walking past the sign-up sheets every day, pretending he wasn't interested, acting like he had other plans. What he had were excuses. What he didn't have was a place in the world they were building around this trip. On Tuesday afternoon, while others discussed which cabin groups they'd be in, Jamari sat alone at the back of the art room, decorating a small paper Christmas tree with scraps he found in the classroom bin. His fingers moved with quiet precision, crafting tiny ornaments out of red foil and gluing broken pieces of glitter to the edges. Each piece he added felt like a protest, a refusal to let the season pass him by just because he couldn't afford to perform it their way. When a group of students walked by the open door, laughing about their matching ski goggles, none of them stopped to ask what he was making. One girl, a sophomore he vaguely recognized, paused only long enough to glance inside and mutter, "Wow, that's ghetto." Her voice was sweet, like she didn't even hear the venom in her words. It got worse in the hallway later that day. Jamari overheard a conversation between Ethan's mom and another parent near the front office. He wasn't eavesdropping. They just didn't think he could hear. "They're letting anyone in now," the woman said. "There's a boy in Ethan's class. I don't think his kind even celebrates Christmas. It's probably not safe to have them on trips like this anyway." Her voice lowered, but not enough. Jamari stood frozen, the words lodging deep like splinters, each syllable flaying some small layer of his spirit. For a moment he imagined confronting her, imagined the room going quiet while he demanded an apology, but he knew better. Parents like her didn't get punished. Students like him did. That night he walked home in silence. His apartment building sat wedged between a boarded-up laundromat and a liquor store, wrapped in flickering streetlights and the distant thump of passing trains. His mom wasn't home yet, probably stuck in her second shift. He unlocked the door and walked inside, kicking off his shoes in the hallway and dropping his bag near the heater that never worked properly. As he headed toward the closet to look for old decorations, a rush of cold air followed him, like the draft knew the loneliness he carried and wanted in on it too. He opened a taped-up cardboard box labeled Christmas 2017 and smiled at the contents. Inside were tangled string lights, a chipped ornament shaped like a drum, and several hand-drawn cards he had made when he was younger. His fingers brushed across a faded Santa made out of construction paper, with uneven eyes and a glued-on cotton beard. He remembered making it at his old school, the one where the teachers wore cardigans and told him he was destined for big things. Before this prep school had offered him a scholarship, before he'd become a symbol instead of a student, an idea formed slowly in the quiet. If the school's trip was off-limits, and no one thought kids like him celebrated Christmas, maybe it was time to show them how wrong they were. Not with arguments, with presents, with something they couldn't ignore. He'd organize his own holiday event at school, something local, simple, but real. Music, decorations, food from all different backgrounds. Something that reminded everyone that joy didn't have to come with a $2,500 price tag. He would call it the real holiday experience. Something honest, something that included people like him. Something that felt like home. The next morning, Jamari walked into the student council office with a typed-out proposal in hand. He had stayed up late formatting it properly, listing vendors, outlining decorations, even offering to help with setup and cleanup. When he presented it, the vice president, Marley, blonde, polished and always smiling, listened politely, then gave a practiced grin that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a nice thought," she said, "but the budget's already committed to the ski trip. Maybe next year." Jamari persisted, asking if they could use leftover decorations, suggesting they hold it in the cafeteria or courtyard. Marley's tone hardened just slightly, her smile still fixed. "Jamari, we've already put so much effort into the winter retreat. We don't want to divide attention." That word divide hung in the air like a blade. It wasn't about logistics. It was about not wanting his kind of joy on display. Later, Jamari asked few teachers if they would support the event unofficially. One said she'd think about it. Another changed the subject. A third, Mr. Byrne from chemistry, nodded sympathetically but warned him to be careful not to stir things up too close to finals. As Jamari left the staff hallway, proposal still folded neatly in his pocket. The Christmas banners hanging from the ceiling felt like they were mocking him. He walked past the main office where students were picking up ski trip permission slips, laughing, hugging, planning matching pajamas for their cabins. He kept walking, but something inside him cracked. He stepped into the library, sat down at the empty table near the back, and stared at his proposal for a long time. He had followed every rule. He had asked politely. He had offered to do the work. Still, they had turned their back. But just as he was about to put it away for good, a voice behind him broke the silence. "That tree you made in the art room. It reminded me of something I used to have." Jamari turned. It was Mr. Alvarez, the janitor, usually quiet, mostly invisible, always polite. But there was something in his eyes now that looked like recognition, like memory, like maybe, just maybe, Jamari wasn't the first kid who had tried to light up a place that only wanted him to stay in the dark. Jamari leans in, curious, as Mr. Alvarez adds, "You're not the first to try, and I still have the photos to prove it." By Friday morning, the school was pulsing with energy, the kind that crackled around privilege disguised as holiday cheer. Snow had begun to stick lightly to the sidewalks outside, framing the Gothic stone buildings in white. Inside, the hallway buzzed with more than just talk about the ski retreat. There was something new in the air. Jamari noticed it the moment he walked past the front stairwell. Laughter that stopped when he approached, paper crinkling against locker doors, and that same eerie politeness from students who smiled too wide when he came near. At first he didn't think much of it, but as he turned the corner toward his locker, a pattern began to form. An unmistakable, cruel design. Each locker along the hallway was marked with a bright red envelope, taped perfectly in the center like a badge. Gold script curled across the front of each one. "Winter Lights Party. You're invited." Every locker but his. He scanned the row once, then again. His locker number 218. Middle of the hall was the only one bare. The red paint chipped near the bottom edge. A reminder of the day he'd arrived late, and the hall monitor had slammed it shut, scolding him like he wasn't supposed to be there. But today the locker said something else. It said excluded. It said not welcome. It said we didn't forget you. We chose to leave you out. His hands went cold as he fumbled with the lock, pretending not to notice. Pretending the silence pressing in around him wasn't deliberate. Over his shoulder, two girls passed by, whispering, then giggling. One said the word ghetto under her breath, and Jamari didn't miss the tone, the way it dripped with mockery. He knew exactly what they were referring to. The handmade Christmas tree, the proposal that had gone nowhere, the decorations he'd tried to bring in from home. He remembered the phrase, his kind, still ringing in his ears from Ethan's mother earlier that week. Now it echoed louder than ever, dressed up in glitter and gold envelopes. Students walked past, holding their invitations like golden tickets, comparing notes on who was hosting, what to wear, which luxury house would be used. It wasn't a school event, which meant they could pretend it wasn't exclusion. It was just a private gathering. One student, a boy in Jamari's calculus class, glanced at him briefly, then looked away just as quickly, guilty but not guilty enough to speak. No one ever was. He didn't ask anyone why he wasn't invited. He already knew. By lunchtime, whispers moved faster than the snow falling outside. A rumor circulated that Jamari had tried to make his own party since he wasn't included in the real one. Another said he was trying to make everything about race again. These weren't just lies, they were weapons, designed to twist his reality into something shameful. He sat alone at the corner table in the cafeteria, pushing cold chicken around his tray. His appetite was gone, but he forced himself to stay seated, to hold space in a room that had already tried to erase him. He watched students across the room laugh and share dress ideas for the party, holiday earrings sparkling under the lights, wealth and ease painted onto every movement. And then, from the far corner, he caught movement barely noticeable. It was Mr. Alvarez, the janitor who had spoken to him in the library just days earlier. He moved quietly between tables, sweeping, picking up discarded wrappers. As he passed by Jamari's table, he didn't look up, didn't break stride, but he slid a folded paper napkin onto the tray and kept moving. Jamari waited a few seconds, then unfolded it under the table. Scrawled in clean block letters were 6 words. Don't let them erase your joy. His throat tightened. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the reminder that someone saw him. Someone understood what was being taken, not just with invitations or rejections, but with every sideways glance and offhand comment and forced silence. After lunch, curiosity pulled Jamari toward the supply closet tucked behind the gym. That's where Mr. Alvarez usually retreated between classes, away from the noise. Jamari hesitated before knocking softly. The door creaked open a second later, revealing shelves stacked with brooms, floor wax, cleaning rags, and in the center, Mr. Alvarez, leaning against the mop sink, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You read the note? He asked, voice low. Jamari nodded. Yeah. Thank you. But why me? Mr. Alvarez exhaled slowly, then motioned him inside, locking the door behind them. Because I know what it feels like, to be visible only when they want to use you as proof of progress, and invisible the rest of the time. There was something different in his voice now, a weight Jamari hadn't noticed before. Not just empathy, but lived experience. I've worked here for 24 years, Alvarez continued, but I walked these halls long before that. Back when I was a student. Class of Jamari blinked. That part wasn't in any of the alumni brochures or glossy recruitment videos. He had never seen a single Black or Latino face featured from those years. I was one of the first students of color this school ever admitted. They called it a diversity experiment. I was 16, proud and stupid enough to believe I belonged here. I made it to my senior year. Then suddenly, I didn't. What happened? Jamari asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alvarez looked away, jaw tightening. They said I vandalized a teacher's car, that I was angry and disruptive. But I didn't do it. They needed a reason to get me out, because I was organizing a student group, one that made them uncomfortable. Jamari felt his chest tighten. The air in the supply closet suddenly felt thinner. You got expelled? They didn't call it that. They said I was invited to withdraw voluntarily to preserve my academic record. Alvarez let the words hang, then looked Jamari in the eyes. It broke me, for years. But I came back quietly. I work here now because I want to protect kids like you, the ones they try to erase. Jamari's heart pounded. All this time he thought he was the only one. But he wasn't the first. And suddenly, everything he felt, the isolation, the quiet humiliation, the exhaustion, it all connected. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked. I did, Alvarez said. No one listened. They only hear you when it becomes inconvenient not to. Jamari leaned against the wall, thoughts spinning. This wasn't just about a Christmas party. This was a pattern, a history. Alvarez pulled out a folded photo from a worn envelope and handed it to Jamari. It showed a younger version of him, smiling, standing in front of a student club banner. 4 other students stood beside him, Black, brown, and one Asian. The banner read, Unity for All. A second photo showed a different scene. The same room, empty. The banner gone. "I have more," Alvarez said. "Photos, notes, newspaper clippings they buried. If you really want to create something that lasts, you'll need to understand what you're walking into." Jamari stared at the photo. The edges curled with time. In that moment, something inside him hardened. Not bitterness, but resolve. The system that tried to break Alvarez was the same one now, trying to break him. But this time, someone remembered. Someone kept the proof. Alvarez reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small brass key. He handed it to Jamari and said, "If you want the full truth, this opens a locked cabinet in the archives, one they never wanted students like us to find." Jamari held the brass key tightly in his palm, the way someone might hold onto a spark in the dark. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of possibility. Mr. Alvarez hadn't said much more after handing it over. "Archives building, basement level. Cabinet, don't go during class hours. And don't tell anyone you're going." The warning wasn't theatrical. It was whispered like gospel, passed down from someone who'd been burned by the very fire he was now handing to Jamari. That night, Jamari barely slept. He stared at the key resting on his nightstand, lit only by the glow of streetlights leaking through his bedroom window, wondering what kind of truth was worth hiding behind a locked metal door. By Saturday morning, the school campus was nearly empty, thanks to the ski retreat taking most of the students and several teachers to Vermont. That absence gave the grounds an eerie stillness, like the building was holding its breath. Jamari slipped in through the back gate, using the copy of his student ID. The path to the archives building was tucked between the library and the old science lab, a hallway most students never walked through. He moved with quiet urgency, careful not to be seen. Every step felt heavier, like the building itself was trying to warn him away. He found the basement stairwell, unlit and cold, the air sharp with the scent of old paper and metal. As he descended, the sounds of the school above faded until he could only hear his own breath. The archives door creaked when he opened it. Thick wood, reinforced with rusted iron hinges. Inside was a narrow room lined with metal cabinets and dusty shelving. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but not all of them worked. Only 3 tubes flickered dimly, casting a pale, uneven glow across the rows. Cabinet 12B sat on the far end, half obscured behind a leaning cart of old yearbooks. Jamari pushed them aside and knelt in front of the drawer. He inserted the key, hand shaking now from the realization that whatever lay behind this lock had been kept hidden for decades. The click echoed too loudly. Slowly, he pulled the drawer open, and what he saw pulled the air from his lungs. Files, dozens of them. Some labeled with full names, some only with student ID numbers. Yellowing folders stuffed with paper, photos, old disciplinary forms, copies of expulsion notices. All of them had one thing in common. The profile photos showed black or brown faces. He pulled one folder, then another. A pattern emerged. Each student had been accused of vague infractions, disruptive behavior, inappropriate language, refusal to adhere to school culture. There were no police reports, no real investigation, just administrative notes and board signatures. Each file ended the same way: recommendation for withdrawal. Jamari kept flipping, heart pounding, until he hit the stack of photographs wedged at the back. Black and white snapshots from holiday events, school plays, graduation ceremonies. Dozens, maybe hundreds. He spread them out along the dusty floor. It was like watching history deny itself in real time. Every single face in the photos was white. No exception. He scanned class after class, searching for even one face that looked like his. Nothing. Even in years where he knew a handful of black students had attended, the records had been scrubbed clean of their presence. Then he found it, a grainy photo dated 1991. 5 students stood in front of a banner reading "Unity for All." The same club Alvarez had mentioned. There he was, young and wide-eyed, smiling proudly. Beside him stood another boy, tall and serious, his arms crossed defiantly. On the back of the photo, scribbled in faint pencil, was the name Elijah D. Knox. The name hit Jamari like a thunderclap. Elijah Knox. He knew that name, not from school, from the neighborhood, from block meetings, from the old barbershop where stories were traded like currency. Elijah was the man who ran the community outreach program. Jamari's grandmother volunteered with every month. He was the activist who gave speeches at city council, who walked kids home from school when police started circling too often. Jamari had grown up hearing him described as a warrior, fierce, relentless, and righteous. He never knew Knox had once been part of this school, let alone erased from it. Shaking, Jamari pulled the rest of the folder. It contained a single disciplinary report. Elijah Knox, accused of inciting racial division among student body, removed after repeated warnings. At the bottom, next to the recommendation to expel, was a signature Jamari hadn't expected to see. Not yet, not this soon. D. Cartwright. Then just a junior faculty member, now the same professor who had humiliated him in front of the class. The man who'd mocked his culture with a smile. The man who still roamed the halls, protected by tenure, legacy, and the silence of this cabinet. Jamari felt dizzy. He sat back on his heels. The documents still spread around him like broken glass. The story he'd been living wasn't just his own. It was part of a legacy, engineered and repeated, fine-tuned with precision. It wasn't just prejudice, it was practice. It wasn't just oversight, it was orchestration. And the very man who stood at the front of his classroom preaching about realism and tradition had spent decades crafting a version of the school that excluded the truth. He stared at Elijah's photo again. The eyes were familiar now. Sharp, proud, unbroken. And suddenly Jamari understood why Knox had never mentioned this part of his past. Because the wound was still open. Because the system had tried to bury him under silence. As Jamari gathered the documents, an idea bloomed, reckless but righteous. He would make copies, bring them to light, show the world what this school had done. But just as he began stuffing the files back into the drawer, a soft sound echoed from the hallway.
Footsteps.
He froze. They were measured. Approaching slowly. Not hurried. Not uncertain, like someone who had a reason to be here. Someone who already knew. He tucked the photos back, closed the drawer, and backed into the shadowed corner behind a tall filing cabinet. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A voice spoke. Calm. Familiar. I know someone's in there. It was Mr. Cartwright. Jamari's pulse exploded. Cartwright stepped into the doorway, but didn't enter fully. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the room like he was inspecting a museum he had personally curated. This building, it has history, Cartwright said softly, almost like he was talking to himself. And history belongs to those who protect it. Jamari didn't move. He barely breathed. He watched Cartwright scan the cabinets, his eyes briefly resting on drawer 12B. Then, after a long pause, the professor turned and walked away without another word. The footsteps faded, but Cartwright had been here. At this exact moment, on a Saturday, during a school trip, which meant one thing was clear. He knew someone had unlocked the drawer. As Jamari slowly stepped out of the shadows, shaken but more determined than ever, he felt something sharp under his foot. He looked down and saw a torn corner of Elijah Knox's photo, deliberately ripped and left behind. A warning, a message. The system wasn't just hiding history, it was watching who dared to uncover it. By the time Monday arrived, the school halls had returned to their usual rhythm. Polished floors, manicured smiles, conversations that skimmed the surface of everything and avoided anything too uncomfortable. But for Jamari, everything had changed. The torn photo of Elijah Knox still weighed on him like a prophecy. He'd made copies of the files from Cabinet 12B and stashed them in a hollowed-out textbook in his locker, his mind buzzing with ways to expose what he had found. But the moment had to be right. He wasn't just dealing with ignorance anymore. He was standing inside a machine built to erase people like him. And now, the machine knew he'd touched its core. Midweek, the principal made a school-wide announcement over the PA system. Her voice was syrupy and rehearsed, as if pulled from an old holiday commercial. This year, we're excited to launch our first What Christmas Means to Me writing contest. Submissions are open to all students. The winner will read their piece aloud at our annual holiday assembly and have it printed in the school's newsletter and alumni magazine. Let's spread joy through the beauty of words. Jamari felt a flicker in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close. A dare. They were asking what Christmas meant. He knew exactly what it meant. But not the way they expected. He wasn't going to write about fireplaces or gift cards or ski trips. His version of Christmas wasn't wrapped in money. It was wrapped in warmth and survival. In cardboard boxes of decorations passed down. In the quiet resilience of his mother bringing home off-brand cocoa mix after a 12-hour shift. In the way joy had to be created, not bought. He started writing that night. No outline. No thesaurus. Just his raw memory, poured onto the page. He wrote about sitting by the window as a kid, watching other families light up their front yards while his apartment complex stayed dark. He wrote about his grandmother making a feast out of nothing, turning canned goods into celebration. He wrote about never feeling poor during the holidays, until he came to this school. He described what it was like to be surrounded by red bows and green garlands, while being treated like a charity case. And then he wrote about hope, about refusing to let other people define what joy looked like, about holding on to dignity in a place designed to rob it. It wasn't an essay. It was a confession, a confrontation, and a celebration all at once. He submitted it quietly, dropping it in the tray outside the English department like the instructions said. Then he waited. 3 days later, the results were posted outside the main office. Jamari walked toward the board with his chest tight, hands balled in his jacket pockets. A group of students crowded around, buzzing with curiosity. At the top of the list was a name he recognized. Whitney Farrow, Jr., honor roll, editor of the school newsletter. Her winning essay, he would later find out, was titled The Spirit of Christmas, Tradition, Charity, and Cookies. Jamari's name wasn't on the list. Not as winner, not as honorable mention. He stared at the board for a long moment, before walking away. That evening, Jamari received an email from the English department. It was a generic message. Thank you for your submission. While your essay demonstrated strong emotional tone and personal experience, the committee felt it was not aligned with the intended tone of the contest. He reread the last line over and over. Not aligned with the intended tone. That tone, he realized, was silence. It was smiling through discomfort. It was sweetness without struggle. They had never wanted truth, just decoration. The next morning, he arrived early to meet with Miss Teller, one of the junior English teachers. She had always been kind, offering quiet encouragement without ever saying too much. When he stepped into her classroom, she looked up from her desk, eyes already red-rimmed. I shouldn't say this, she said in a whisper, but I read your essay. Jamari blinked, unsure how to respond. I wasn't on the judging panel, she continued, voice trembling. But I saw your piece in the shared folder. I had to tell you. You made me cry. It was one of the most powerful things I've read in years. Then why? They don't want real stories. Jamari, they want comfort. They want confirmation of their world, not confrontation with yours. Jamari nodded slowly, the rejection turning into fuel. Thank you, he said, his voice level. That means more than the award. She looked at him with a strange intensity, as if she was holding back 100 truths she couldn't say out loud. Just keep writing. Don't let them convince you your voice is too much. Later that day, as the holiday assembly approached, Jamari sat in the back row of the auditorium, while Whitney read her piece about snowflakes and charity drives. The crowd applauded politely. No one cried. No one leaned forward. They clapped because that was the rich, polite applause for a story they'd already heard 1,000 times. But the story they hadn't heard, the one they refused to acknowledge, was already beginning to find its way out. What Jamari didn't know, what no one knew, was that Ms. Teller hadn't stopped with her whispered praise. That night, unable to sleep, she posted his essay anonymously on a private teaching forum, titled Voices from the Margins. She tagged it as a Christmas essay rejected for being too real. Within 12 hours, the post had been shared across educator blogs, Twitter threads, and email chains. Within 24 hours, it hit Facebook, shared by a former alum who now taught at a public school in Chicago. Then picked up by a black writer on Instagram, with 100,000 followers, captioned, "This kid just wrote the Christmas truth I never had the courage to say at his age." The views exploded. By the time Jamari woke up the next morning, he had no idea his words had already reached tens of thousands of people. He only realized something was off when he walked into the cafeteria and every eye in the room turned to him. Not with mockery this time, but with a strange reverence, as if something had shifted. Ethan nodded at him for the first time all semester. A girl he barely knew from sophomore year mouthed the word powerful as he passed by. Jamari sat down slowly, heart thudding, wondering what just happened. Then his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No greeting, no name, just a link, and the words, "The world is finally listening. Don't stop." Jamari opened the link and saw his essay plastered on the front page of a viral blog, titled Truth Uninvited: How One Black Student's Christmas Story Exposed a Prep School's Hypocrisy. By noon, the walls of the school had started to bend, not physically, but in presence. Whispers followed Jamari like shadows as he moved through the corridors. Teachers paused mid-sentence when he entered a room. Students opened their phones and pretended not to be looking at him, though their sideways glances and hushed tones betrayed them. Something was shifting beneath the surface of the school's perfectly curated calm, and Jamari could feel it in his chest before he could see it online. When he stepped into the computer lab between classes, the magnitude of what had happened hit him full force. His essay, the same one that had been dismissed for being too political, was now front page on EdEquity Watch, a nationally read education blog. A bold headline stretched across the top of the page: "When Christmas Isn't Safe, a black teen's rejected essay goes viral." There were thousands of comments: teachers, parents, community leaders, former students, all calling it raw, necessary, brave. A screenshot of the school newsletter with his name glaringly absent had been attached to the post, proving the rejection wasn't just speculation. Below it, someone had added a side-by-side comparison of his essay's excerpt and the winning piece. The contrast was devastating. By the time the bell rang for lunch, the storm had only grown. On Twitter, and Jamari Speaks was trending. On Instagram, excerpts from his essay were being reshared by educators, influencers, and even a few celebrities. One caption read, "He didn't just write about Christmas, he wrote about being unseen." In a matter of hours, his words had slipped beyond the boundaries of the school that rejected them, and into the bloodstream of a national conversation. But with that reach came something else: resistance. And it came fast. That afternoon, Principal Wainwright called an emergency faculty meeting. Rumors spread that the school's inbox had been flooded with thousands of emails overnight, parents demanding statements, alumni pulling donations, some defending the school, others threatening lawsuits. Someone even leaked internal memos showing that the administration had tried to quietly issue a media blackout, a futile attempt to stop a wildfire with a garden hose. Mr. Cartwright, meanwhile, was furious and unapologetic. During his third period history class, he launched into a rant about false narratives and weaponized victimhood. Jamari wasn't in that class, but word spread quickly. According to students, Cartwright had called Jamari's writing dramatic exaggeration and accused him of trying to start a race war in a place that gave him opportunity. "He's trying to tear down a school that gave him everything," Cartwright reportedly said, pacing the front of the room. That essay wasn't a reflection. It was an attack. When Jamari heard this secondhand, something inside him chilled. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything he already knew. This wasn't about one essay. This was about power and the panic it felt when exposed. That night his phone buzzed non-stop. Messages poured in from friends he hadn't spoken to in months, from his mother who had just seen a repost of the essay from one of her coworkers, from teachers, strangers, even reporters. He was stunned to learn that local activist groups had picked up his story, some planning to protest at the school gates. Someone had even tagged the school's official Instagram account with the message, "Diversity isn't decoration." But in the middle of the noise, one message stood out. It came through email, sent from a generic newsroom address. Subject: interview request. Channel 8 News Tonight. Jamari opened it slowly. Inside was a short message. "Hi Jamari, we've been following the coverage of your Christmas essay, and the response it sparked. We'd like to invite you to share your story live on our evening broadcast. Our producer believes your voice is critical right now. We want to hear directly from you unedited. If interested, please respond ASAP. We'll arrange transportation and prep support. You've started something powerful. Let's make sure it's heard. Best." Rachel Thomas, producer, Channel 8 News. Jamari stared at the message, the cursor blinking back at him like a dare. His stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the weight of visibility. Just a week ago, he was decorating a paper tree alone. Now the world wanted to hear his voice. Still, doubts crept in. Was he ready? What if he said the wrong thing? What if they twisted his words? He showed the email to his mother that night. She sat on the edge of his bed, reading it carefully, her eyes flickering with both pride and anxiety. "It's not easy, baby," she said softly, her hand on his shoulder. "They're gonna want you to be either angry or grateful. Nothing in between. Just be real. That's what got you here. Not their version of you. Yours." He nodded, trying to breathe through the tightness in his chest. Ms. Teller called that evening too. Her voice was hushed but urgent. "I know you're scared, but this is the moment. If you do this, you're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for every kid who's been silenced in schools like ours." Jamari looked at the copy of his essay on his desk, still annotated with the raw truth he had tried to give them. The version they had turned away, and for the first time he didn't feel ashamed of it. He felt ready. He opened the email, typed a short response. Yes, I'll do it. As he hit send, his laptop dinged with a new message, one that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was anonymous. No subject line. No name. Just a file attachment, and 6 words. Ask Cartwright about the 2002 cover-up. Jamari clicked the attachment, and what he saw wasn't an essay or a photo, but a scanned disciplinary form stamped confidential, with Cartwright's signature at the bottom, and the words student isolated for racial agitation. The student's name, Marion Fields, and next to it, the handwritten word expelled. The studio lights were hotter than Jamari expected. They cut through the room like interrogations, sharp, relentless, and without mercy. His hands were sweating under the table, but he kept them steady on his lap, his posture upright, his eyes scanning the cameras, and the producers shuffling behind them like a quiet army. It wasn't until the sound technician clipped a mic to his collar that the gravity of it all hit him fully. This wasn't a school assembly. This was live television, a citywide broadcast, and he wasn't just representing himself anymore. His words now carried the weight of 100 invisible students, kids like Marion Fields and Elijah Knox, whose stories were erased long before they had a chance to be told. The studio assistant motioned toward the host's table. Jamari followed, his sneakers tapping softly on the laminate floor. The set looked cozy on screen. Bookshelves, warm lighting, a fake fireplace, but it felt clinical up close, controlled. Every prop in place, every light calculated. Then just as Jamari slid into his chair, he saw him, Mr. Cartwright, already seated across from him, legs crossed, his signature maroon tie knotted perfectly at the collar. He wasn't supposed to be here. The email from Channel 8 had said it would be a one-on-one interview. Jamari's voice, uninterrupted. But now, the man who had humiliated him in class, who had called him a troublemaker and undermined his truth, was sitting just 10 feet away, smiling like a politician. Jamari's heartbeat spiked, but he didn't flinch. He met Cartwright's gaze, cold, calculating, and clearly ready for a performance. The host, Rachel Thomas, adjusted her mic and smiled into the camera.
Good evening, viewers. Tonight we have a conversation that's ignited dialogue across schools, homes, and social media. Race, education, and who gets to tell their story. On one side we have Jamari Whitfield, whose essay has sparked national attention. On the other, Mr. Douglas Cartwright, veteran educator of 30 years. Let's begin. The first few minutes were measured. Rachel asked Jamari to explain what inspired his essay. He kept his voice clear, his message honest. He spoke about exclusion masquerading as tradition, about what it felt like to celebrate Christmas with pride only to be told that his version didn't count. He didn't speak in anger. He spoke in lived experience, every word ringing with quiet conviction. Then Rachel turned to Cartwright. Well, he began with a theatrical sigh. Let me be clear, I have dedicated my life to education, to helping underprivileged students succeed, but we must draw the line between raising awareness and weaponizing identity. This young man has unfortunately allowed his personal frustration to misrepresent the integrity of our institution. Jamari stiffened. He had expected deflection, but this was something else. Gaslighting dressed in civility. Rachel asked, "Are you suggesting Jamari's story is fabricated?" "I'm saying it's distorted," Cartwright replied smoothly. "He's playing the race card, and quite effectively, I might add. But one student's anecdote should not define the character of an entire faculty or school." Jamari inhaled slowly, anchoring himself. He could feel the eyes on him, not just the ones in the studio, but the thousands watching from home, waiting to see if he'd crumble. He didn't. "With all due respect," Jamari said, his voice steady but piercing, "you don't get to decide how real my experience is. You don't get to dismiss what I lived just because it doesn't match your memory of the moment." Cartwright smirked. "And what exactly did you live, Jamari? That you weren't invited to a party. That's what this is about." "No," Jamari replied, leaning forward now. "This is about the fact that every holiday event, every essay contest, every corner of that school is curated to celebrate one version of Christmas, one version of belonging. And when someone like me dares to offer another, we're told it's too political. We're told we don't understand the tone." The tension in the studio shifted. Cartwright's smile flickered. Just slightly. Rachel interjected, "Mr. Cartwright, Jamari's essay has resonated with tens of thousands. Why do you think that is?" Cartwright waved, dismissively. "Because people love outrage. They love to feel like they're on the right side of something. But popularity doesn't make something true." Jamari cut in,
his voice rising, not in anger, but urgency. But silence doesn't make it false. You called me a troublemaker for sharing my story, but that's exactly what you called Elijah Knox. That's what you called Marion Fields, and we both know they were punished for speaking out, just like you're trying to punish me. Cartwright's eyes narrowed. His polished exterior cracked for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected Jamari to bring names. He definitely hadn't expected those names. Rachel's eyes widened. Can you elaborate on those references, Jamari? Jamari didn't break eye contact with Cartwright. They were students, both expelled after confronting racism in that school, and both had disciplinary forms signed by Mr. Cartwright himself. Silence fell. Real silence. The kind that swells just before something irreversible happens. Cartwright shifted in his seat, visibly rattled now. Those cases were decades ago, and they were buried. Jamari snapped. No longer soft-spoken. Just like you tried to bury my voice. Rachel looked stunned but composed. Mr. Cartwright, do you deny your involvement in those disciplinary actions? Cartwright stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. This is a smear campaign. I won't be part of it. He pulled off his mic and tossed it onto the table. Mr. Cartwright, Rachel called after him. We're still live. But he was already off screen, storming past the cameras, his face flushed, jaw clenched. The studio fell into chaos for a moment, as producers scrambled and Rachel tried to salvage the segment. Jamari remained seated, still, strong, and for the first time since his essay had gone viral, he felt something that wasn't rage or grief. It was power. But just as Rachel turned back to him, preparing to wrap the segment, a crew member rushed over and whispered into her ear. Her expression changed. Eyes wide, lips parting in disbelief. She turned toward Jamari and said, "We've just received breaking information from an anonymous source." She turned to the camera and continued, "A former faculty member has just submitted a formal statement accusing Mr. Cartwright of fabricating disciplinary records and naming other students who may have been wrongfully expelled." The morning after the broadcast, the school felt different, not in the way it usually felt, after a big game or an assembly. Those moments came with excitement and collective pride. This was quieter, thicker, tense like the air before a thunderstorm. Jamari knew the second he stepped through the front gates that his return was not going to be triumphant. It was going to be tested. He didn't make it 10 steps before he saw it. His locker number 2018 was defaced. A thick, jagged slur had been sprayed across the front in red paint, as if someone had taken their time making every letter cruel and deliberate. Above it, in all caps, "You're not special." The surrounding lockers were untouched, perfectly clean. It wasn't random. It wasn't vague. It was surgical, targeted, public. Jamari stood in front of it, expression unreadable. Students streamed past him, some whispering, some pretending not to see, others laughing under their breath. A few paused, uncertain whether to offer sympathy or keep their distance. No one moved to clean it. No one from administration showed up with concern. He reached for the lock, opened it as usual, and placed his books inside without a word, as if the hate painted over his space was just another part of the school's decor. He kept his composure, but the sting of betrayal pressed against his skin. Not from the vandalism itself, he had braced for that. What hollowed him out was the silence, the kind that wrapped around institutional shame like insulation. He passed faculty members in the hallway who had smiled at him for months. Now they looked through him, eyes darting away, mouths tightening like acknowledgement itself was danger. By third period, Principal Wainwright had made a weak announcement over the PA. "An act of vandalism occurred on campus this morning. We are investigating the matter. We ask all students to remain focused and respectful." Not a single mention of Jamari's name, not a word about racism. It was as if the slur had been directed at air. That afternoon, he overheard 2 students by the vending machines whispering that their parents had warned them to stay away from him. "He's bringing too much heat," one said. "My dad said this used to be a good school before all this activism crap." The other laughed nervously. "Bet you $5 Cartwright comes back with a lawsuit." Every class felt like a performance. Teachers spoke carefully, their lectures overly neutral. One tried to lead a general discussion about media responsibility, but when a student brought up the interview, she shut it down instantly. "We're not here to debate current events," she said, her voice trembling with fear of consequence. The divide among students was undeniable. Some had printed out Jamari's essay and posted it on their lockers, forming a quiet tribute. Others mocked it openly, reposting the essay online with doctored memes and captions, like holiday hysteria. A few wore matching shirts with a snowflake crossed out on the front, a not-so-subtle dig at Jamari's perceived sensitivity. But nothing hit harder than what happened to Mr. Alvarez. It was just after lunch when Jamari noticed the janitor's closet had been padlocked shut, the hallway eerily clean for the first time in weeks. Something felt off. He searched the maintenance wing, the front office, even the faculty lounge where Alvarez occasionally took his breaks, but there was no sign of him. Finally, he saw the brown envelope posted to the staff bulletin board, folded once and pinned beside the daily lunch schedule. Jamari pulled it down. Inside, a short typed notice. Effective immediately, Mr. Guillermo Alvarez has been terminated from his position due to a breach of confidentiality and inappropriate student interaction. Jamari stared at the letter, heart sinking. It wasn't just retaliation. It was a message. Alvarez had dared to whisper the truth to a student, and the system had slammed its door shut on him for it. He ran his fingers over the words, jaw tightening. A man who had kept the school clean, quiet and safe, for decades, had been erased in the span of a single paragraph. No hearing, no explanation, no goodbyes. Jamari didn't cry. But something broke again. Something deep. This wasn't about one locker. This was about removal, cleansing, rejection not just of him, but of anyone who gave him strength. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, the light above flickering slightly, his essay copy beside him, the envelope from the school lying open, like an accusation. His mother stirred something on the stove behind him. "They're trying to make you afraid," she said without looking up. "That means they're afraid of you." Jamari didn't respond right away. But he felt it, the heat, the fire building again, not as a blaze of fury but as a controlled burn, a strategy. He opened his laptop and pulled up the school's online calendar. The annual holiday assembly was 2 days away, a grand tradition hosted in the historic auditorium, families invited, press often present, speeches, choirs, perfect smiles, no controversy. It was time to interrupt the performance. He called Ethan first, not because they were friends, but because Ethan had once looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. "I'm planning a protest," Jamari said. Silent, peaceful, but loud in all the right ways. Ethan hesitated. "What kind of protest?" Jamari explained. "Students would wear all black. No logos, no signs, no noise. Just stand silently during the principal's opening speech, hands clasped or raised. A single act of presence. Undeniable. Unignorable." "I'm in," Ethan replied after a beat. "And I think I can get others." The next 24 hours moved fast. Word spread through group chats, DMs, even shared Google Docs. Some teachers discreetly passed notes. Others said nothing but nodded slightly in class. By the next afternoon, Jamari had over 40 students committed, and more trickling in by the hour. Miss Teller found him in the library, sliding a folded piece of paper across the desk. "They won't cancel the assembly. Too much press. But be careful, they'll try to spin it." "I'm done spinning," Jamari said, voice low. The night before the assembly, he stood in his room, laying out his black shirt and pants like armor. Not flashy, not defiant. Just deliberate. Beside his bed, the printed photo of Elijah Knox. On his desk, the email from Channel. On his phone, dozens of unread messages from parents, activists, reporters. And yet in that quiet moment, it wasn't noise that comforted him. It was the silence to come. The silence they wouldn't be able to ignore. As Jamari turned off the light and crawled into bed, his phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number read, "If you go through with this protest, we'll make sure you never graduate. You've been warned." The morning of the holiday assembly arrived cloaked in theater. Strings of lights draped every hallway. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, like fragile lies. The cafeteria reeked of peppermint and staged joy. Teachers smiled too wide, voices too bright, pretending the last 2 weeks hadn't happened, pretending that the slur on Jamari's locker had been erased, not painted over, but underneath the tinsel and fake cheer, something real was swelling, something no one could ignore this time. Jamari walked onto campus dressed in black, every piece of his outfit intentional, silent armor. His steps were measured, spine straight, heart thrumming in his chest like it was beating for more than just him. As he passed students in the hallway, heads turned. Some nodded, others averted their gaze. But then a girl, Madeline, a white junior who never once looked at him before, joined him at his side, also dressed in black. Then another, and another. By the time he reached the auditorium, more than 30 students walked behind him in unspoken formation. Inside, the lights were dimmed low, the stage dressed like a postcard. The school orchestra played softly, as families found their seats. Cameramen from 2 local news stations adjusted their tripods in the aisles, already anticipating a feel-good holiday segment. Parents filled the rows, their voices buzzing with expectation. Principal Wainwright stood near the curtain, rehearsing her opening speech in hushed tones. Jamari took his place in the audience. Row 5, center aisle. Around him, dozens of students also in black, filtered in, scattered across the auditorium. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were the protest. Their stillness would be louder than any chant. They held nothing but their presence, until one student near the back unzipped her backpack and pulled out a sign. Hand-drawn, simple. We celebrate truth too. Then another. Joy isn't just for the rich. Then more followed. Dozens of signs, raised quietly, shaking slightly in nervous hands. As Principal Wainwright stepped onto the stage, her voice met a silence so full, it felt like thunder waiting to crack. The orchestra faded. Phones were lifted discreetly, cameras clicking. She cleared her throat. Good morning, students, families, guests. Welcome to our annual Holiday Lights Assembly. We gather today to reflect on community, celebration, and unity. She paused. One by one, the black-clad students began to stand. No applause, no noise, just rising. Jamari stood too, sign in hand, expression steady, his gaze locked forward, not looking at the crowd, not scanning for support. This wasn't a performance, it was a reckoning. Gasps rippled through the rows. A few parents whispered. One teacher stood abruptly and exited through the side door. The news cameras turned immediately toward the movement. This wasn't going to be the cozy holiday fluff segment they expected. From stage right, a sudden motion. Mr. Cartwright emerged from the wings, face tight, lips pressed into a line so thin it looked like a scar. He approached the podium, whispered something sharply to Wainwright. She flinched but did not respond. Cartwright stepped forward and addressed the crowd directly. His voice clipped. This is inappropriate. This is not the time or place for political theatrics. We are here to celebrate, not to be held hostage by. But he was cut off not by a student, not by a teacher, but by a voice from the audience. A parent stood. A black woman near the 3rd row, dressed elegantly, arms crossed. So when exactly is the time? She asked. Her voice rang through the auditorium. Because I've been waiting for this school to listen to my son for 3 years. Another parent stood. Then another. This isn't protest. This is presence, one father said. You call this division, but all I see is courage, said another mother, wiping a tear from her cheek. Cartwright's face flushed with quiet rage. He turned to Wainwright again, gesturing toward the exit, mouthing shut it down. But Wainwright didn't move. She looked out over the crowd, the standing students, the signs, the parents, and her expression shifted. Whatever fear had kept her compliant all these years had cracked. For the first time in her career, she saw the cost of silence measured not in policy, but in people. She stepped back to the mic. This assembly was meant to reflect who we are, and what I see, what I cannot ignore, is a community demanding to be seen. So we will not shut this down. Not today. Applause broke out, not thunderous but real. Cartwright stepped back from the stage, seething, his fists clenched at his sides. The cameras kept rolling. The students remained standing. The orchestra sat frozen. No Christmas carols played that morning. Instead, what played was history, finally being rewritten in real time. After the assembly, the halls were chaos. Students wept. Teachers exchanged shell-shocked glances. The news vans remained parked outside the gates, waiting for interviews. Reporters approached Jamari as he left the auditorium, but he offered no soundbite. He simply held his sign high and walked on. By the end of the day, a new message flashed across every student and staff email inbox. To all faculty and students, the school board has scheduled an emergency closed-door meeting for Thursday to review recent events and allegations. All staff are required to submit written statements. Further communication will follow. Jamari sat at his desk that evening, still in his black clothes, holding the announcement in his hand, like a victory laced with consequence. The board was meeting. Finally, and not behind their usual curtain of secrecy, but in direct response to what the world had seen. But then came a twist he didn't expect. That night, as Jamari scrolled through the news footage of the assembly replayed on local broadcasts, He noticed something strange in the background of one clip. A shadow moving in the upper balcony. Not a student. Not a teacher. He paused the frame. Zoomed in. There, standing in the far back, hidden in partial darkness, was Mr. Cartwright. Not in the audience. Not backstage, but holding a file in his hand. One Jamari recognized immediately. It was the same file that contained Marion Field's disciplinary record. He hadn't handed it in. He hadn't burned it. He had kept it. And the camera caught one moment. Cartwright slipping the file into a folder labeled Contingency, Whitfield. The email arrived at 2:07 a.m. Jamari saw the notification when he rolled over in bed, unable to sleep. The name on the sender line was unrecognizable, a generic school address. But the subject line jolted him upright. Confidential. You're being watched. His thumb hovered for a second before he opened it. The body of the email was brief. No greeting, no closing. There's a file on you. Not just notes. A full folder. Cartwright has been building it since October. Notes, screenshots, academic records, even photos. You need to know what's being used against you. He's done this before. Be careful who you trust. A friend inside. Attached was a single JPEG image. A blurry photo taken from what looked like a security camera feed. It showed Cartwright standing in the administrative wing's back room, bent over a file cabinet. The folder on the table beside him had a white label clearly visible, even in the grainy photo. Whitfield, J. Observations. Jamari's stomach twisted. Not because he was surprised, but because this was confirmation. The feeling he'd had for weeks. That sense of being studied, evaluated through a lens that didn't belong to education but to control, was real. By morning, the school was buzzing again. Only this time, the noise was happening behind closed doors. The emergency board meeting had drawn every member into the school building for the first time in over a year. Usually remote, usually silent. The board had been forced into the light, and they didn't like it. The meeting was held in the old conference room on the third floor. Glass walls, a frosted door, and a legacy of decisions made quietly. But now the room felt like it was under siege. The press had been barred, but the cameras outside the building told a different story. Everyone knew something was coming. Inside that boardroom, tempers simmered under decorum. Margaret Henley, a former alum and now one of the school's longest-standing board members, opened the file folder laid in front of her. It was thick, nearly 100 pages, stamped across the front. Internal report of faculty misconduct. Cartwright. For years, complaints had trickled in. A student who dropped out mid-semester after an altercation in class. A parent who filed a concern about racially charged comments, only to be ignored. Anonymous teacher surveys noting Cartwright's favoritism. Racially coded discipline referrals, and retaliatory grading. Until now, those pages had sat sealed in a locked drawer, protected under the blanket. Excuse of seniority and respectable legacy. But not anymore. One file stood out. It was dated just 3 weeks before the essay contest. Inside was Jamari's scholarship application, covered in red ink notes. In the margins, Cartwright had scrawled, well spoken for his background. Will require monitoring. Possible ideological issues. Watch for performance dips, may play victim card. Margaret read the comments aloud in the meeting. What exactly is this? She asked. Her voice quiet but razor sharp. Cartwright didn't flinch. Observational notes. As part of his academic review. Academic review? Another board member cut in. You were collecting commentary on a student's ideology? It's not what it looks like, Cartwright said, adjusting his tie. But it was. Everyone in the room could see it. Then came the twist no one expected. A board member, young, newer, and often silent, stood up and placed a USB drive in the center of the table. I couldn't stay quiet, she said. You asked for transparency. Well, here it is. She looked directly at Wainwright. I made a copy of Cartwright's private folder. All of it. The room froze. What folder? Someone asked. The young board member continued, her voice steady now. He's been tracking multiple students of color. Not academically, politically, emotionally. He's been labeling them, creating narratives in advance. Jamari wasn't the first, just the most vocal. She opened her laptop and connected the drive. File after file appeared on screen. Fields Marion, escalation risk. Aaliyah T, manipulative tendencies, social justice buzzwords. Seth Brooks, uses race to deflect criticism. Photos, email screenshots, notes from classroom surveillance logs, comments left in grading software, not meant to be exported.
The boardroom became deadly silent.
Principal Wainwright's face had turned pale. This is systemic, and we let it happen. Because we didn't want to rock the boat, Margaret whispered. Someone else muttered, we should have rocked it years ago. Then, as if fate had perfect timing, one of the assistants entered the room, holding a tablet. You need to see this, she said. The screen showed a leak. Every one of the files on that USB had just been sent to a journalist at the Ledger, a regional news outlet with a reputation for brutal honesty and national reach. Someone in the room had forwarded the entire archive. Whistleblower or saboteur, no one could tell. The journalist had already posted a tweet, now going viral. Exclusive. Leaked documents reveal racist surveillance of black students at prestigious prep school. Jamari saw the story minutes later. He was in the library, trying to focus, headphones on but playing nothing. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then wouldn't stop. When he opened the link, his face flushed hot with recognition. The scanned pages, the red ink, his name circled like a threat. It was all there. His classmates began to see it too. One girl gasped out loud. Another whispered. They really kept a file on him. Ethan stared at Jamari with wide eyes. They wrote you up before you ever spoke. Jamari swallowed the rising mix of vindication and grief. Because this wasn't just about him being right. It was about knowing how deep it went, how calculated, and how far they were willing to go to control the story. As Jamari stared at the article climbing the trending charts, a notification popped up at the bottom of his screen. A new email from Mr. Cartwright. Subject line, let's talk before this gets worse. For both of us. By Thursday, Jamari's name was everywhere. On screens, on signs, on the lips of newscasters and activists from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. What had started as a quiet essay written alone in his bedroom had detonated into a national reckoning. Major news channels ran segments daily, under banners like high school racism scandal and whistleblower reveals teacher's secret dossier on black students. Every hour, a new clip aired, his Christmas essay, his silent protest, his viral confrontation with Mr. Cartwright, and now the leaked files proving targeted surveillance. Outside the school gates, protesters gathered with signs reading, "We are not observations, an education nail control." Some were alumni, some were activists, some were parents who had stayed quiet for years, now unwilling to be silent any longer. A line of students in all black stood just inside the gate, a symbolic wall of resistance that refused to move, even when administrators tried to shoo them away. Channel 8 returned, this time with national affiliates. CNN ran a profile piece titled "The Boy Who Challenged Christmas and a Broken System." Inside those ivy-covered walls, the atmosphere was electric with fear and fury. Teachers held closed-door meetings. The administration scrambled to form talking points that wouldn't inflame the fire further. Wainwright issued a public statement acknowledging errors in leadership, but the language was carefully worded, polished by legal counsel. It was too late. The narrative had left their control. Jamari, meanwhile, moved through the halls as if each step had gravity. Some students greeted him like a hero. Others, still aligned with Cartwright's legacy, kept their distance. Their eyes narrowed, their whispers bitter. But it no longer mattered. He didn't need their acceptance. He had found something more powerful than approval. He had found truth, and truth had an audience now. Every day, his phone overflowed with messages. From black students in Oklahoma, Alabama, New Jersey. From kids who had been silenced in their own schools. One wrote, "You said everything I felt but didn't know how to say." Another, "They told me I was too sensitive. Now I know I was just awake." Celebrities reposted his speech from the assembly. One actor called it braver than most Oscar speeches. A best-selling author tweeted, "When a child has to write his way into visibility, the system is already broken." Even a former senator quoted his essay in a speech about education reform. The echo was deafening. And yet Jamari remained grounded, not in humility but in memory. He knew how fast celebration could turn to scrutiny. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing justice. His mother, watching the chaos unfold on a borrowed tablet at work, wiped away tears during her break. "That's my boy," she whispered to herself. Not because he was famous now, but because he hadn't let them take his spirit. He hadn't broken. That night, during a broadcast on MSNBC, the leaked files were analyzed in detail. A panel of educators discussed how Cartwright had operated in plain sight for decades. "The scary part," one said, "isn't just what he wrote, it's that no one stopped him." A second expert added, "He systematized bias. He made it part of the institution's muscle memory. Then came the twist. In a live segment, a school donor appeared on camera, face blurred, but voice unmistakably furious. "I've donated to that school for years," he said, "but after seeing what they let this man do to black students, I've pulled every cent of my funding, and I've called others to do the same." By morning, the dominoes had started to fall. 4 major donors announced withdrawal of endowments totaling over $1.2 million. The school's annual gala was canceled. Parent boards demanded accountability, and then, the announcement everyone had been waiting for hit the school's website, short, sterile, but seismic. Effective immediately, Mr. Douglas Cartwright is suspended pending full investigation into misconduct and racial targeting of students. No apology, no admission, just the beginning of an end. When Jamari saw the announcement, he didn't cheer. He didn't post. He simply exhaled. It wasn't over. But the silence had been broken. The erasure had been interrupted. Later that afternoon, he was pulled from class to meet with Principal Wainwright. For the first time since the assembly, she looked visibly shaken, not rehearsed, not calculated, just tired and exposed. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice strained. Jamari watched her carefully. "What kind of apology?" "The kind that admits we protected the wrong people," she said. "The kind that acknowledges we failed you, and too many others." He didn't offer forgiveness. He wasn't sure she deserved it yet. But he nodded, accepting the weight of her words. "I've called for an external audit of all disciplinary files," she added, "and we're creating a student-led equity board. If you want to be part of it, I'll think about it," Jamari said, his voice calm but clear. That evening, a photo surfaced online, taken from outside the school gates. It showed Jamari standing with 3 younger students, all in black, helping one of them rewrite a holiday essay that had been rejected by their teacher. The caption read, "He didn't just fight for himself, he made space for the next ones." But the celebration was short-lived. That night, as Jamari and his mother watched the news together, her phone rang. She answered, her smile fading immediately. When she hung up, she turned to him, face pale.
"That was someone from the district office,"
she said quietly. "They said Cartwright is fighting the suspension, and he's threatening to sue." Jamari's shoulders tensed. For what? Defamation, hostile work environment, and retaliation. She handed him her phone, where a new headline flashed. "Cartwright's lawyers demand access to all of Jamari Whitfield's personal communications. Lawsuit incoming." For the first time since everything began, the school hallways didn't feel like battlegrounds. The air was different, not healed, not whole, but lighter. Tentative greetings replaced glances that once slid away. Students passed Jamari with nods instead of silence. Even the walls looked less intimidating, stripped of the sterile garlands and red and green banners that once screamed exclusivity. In their place, something new was being built, not from the top down, but from the inside out. Jamari stood outside the auditorium that morning, staring at the hand-painted sign above the door. "Winter Stories, a celebration of all traditions." The font was uneven. The banner was made of construction paper taped together with worn edges. But to Jamari, it was the most honest thing the school had ever hung on its walls. After the protest, after the board's investigation began, and after Cartwright's suspension went public, everything seemed to shift. Not quickly, not fully, but intentionally. Principal Wainwright reached out 2 days after the media explosion. This time not with a warning or a speech, but with an invitation. "We're planning something different this year," she said, "if you're willing to help us design it." At first Jamari hesitated. Was this a trap? Another PR stunt to mask guilt? But when he met with the planning committee, a mix of students from all grades, including several who had never spoken up before, he realized something had changed. The power no longer lived behind glass office doors. It was now scattered across the students who had risen with him, the ones who had held signs in silence and risked backlash. Now they were at the table. Each student brought a piece of themselves. Sarah shared stories of Hanukkah in her grandmother's Bronx apartment. Ahmed suggested including a food station representing holidays across the globe. Marcus, a quiet freshman, asked if they could display handmade ornaments from every student, no matter their tradition. Jamari listened, contributed, and watched something remarkable unfold. An event not built around one culture pretending to include others, but a mosaic of realities honored equally. They renamed the event from the usual Holiday Lights Gala to something simple, powerful, and unbranded: Winter Stories. On the morning of the event, Jamari arrived early. The auditorium looked transformed. Strings of paper lanterns hung from the ceiling. Tables lined the walls, each decorated with items donated or handmade by students. Kinaras and menorahs, paper snowflakes, rangoli patterns, palm leaves from Kwanzaa, handmade piñatas, gingerbread houses, Diwali diyas, and simple candle jars, lit in remembrance of family no longer here. It wasn't curated. It was lived in. It felt like home. Formerly silent teachers stopped Jamari in the hallway, some with tears in their eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up," one math teacher said, voice cracking. "You made us see what we'd been pretending not to." "I've been here for 15 years, another whispered. "And I've never seen this school feel human until now." Jamari accepted each word without judgment. Not because it absolved them, but because holding space for growth was part of the work. His voice had forced a mirror into hands that hadn't asked for it. Now they had no choice but to look. As guests filtered in, parents, community members, teachers, Jamari's stomach turned slightly, waiting for the backlash, the murmured criticism, the "this isn't Christmas" murmurs from old guard families. But it didn't come. Instead, a woman knelt by the table, holding stories written by third graders, and read each one with tears running down her face. A group of white parents clapped as a student recited a Kwanzaa poem. Two boys from the basketball team helped serve tamales and samosas side by side. Even some of the students who had mocked Jamari weeks ago stood quietly by the memorial candle table, reading each card of remembrance for the expelled students. Then, just before the student performances began, Jamari saw his mother and grandmother walk in. He hadn't expected them to make it. Transportation was unreliable, and his mom had been working overtime to cover bills. But here they were. His mother wore a thick brown coat and held her head high, pride radiating off her like heat. His grandmother wore her old Sunday hat, the one with the small gold brooch she reserved only for important days. Jamari walked over, blinking fast. His grandmother hugged him tightly. "Baby, you changed more than this school," she whispered. "You reminded them we're still here." His mom smiled, tears threatening but not yet falling. "This place tried to bury your story. Now they're using it to light the room." Jamari didn't need a microphone or a stage. He stood with them in the back as the student MC began the event, his heart full in a way it hadn't been since before that classroom insult weeks ago. This was what rebuilding looked like, not glittery or grand, but truthful and stitched together with voices once ignored. During the intermission, students handed out small printed booklets with essays, poems, and reflections. On the last page was an excerpt from Jamari's original Christmas essay, the one that had started everything. It read, "Joy in my world isn't quiet. It's loud with memory. It's messy with tradition. And sometimes it's standing when no one else will." As the event neared its end, and applause echoed in the hall, Jamari stepped outside for air. Snow fell lightly, the kind that melted the moment it touched skin. He stood under the street lamp, watching families leave, their conversations hushed and warm. Then he noticed something unusual. An envelope stuck in the seam of his locker. No return name, no handwriting, just a single typewritten note inside. "Don't get comfortable. Some of us still believe you don't belong here." Jamari stared at the note, cold pressing against his throat. The joy of the night trembled slightly but did not vanish. He folded the paper slowly, slid it into his coat pocket, and exhaled. This wasn't the end. It never had been. As he turned to head back inside, he saw Ethan sprinting toward him, breathless. "Jamari," he gasped. "You need to see this. Cartwright just filed an injunction. He's trying to force the board to expel you before winter break." The email hit inboxes before sunrise. No subject line, no salutation, just cold administrative language masked in formality. "The board has scheduled a closed-door disciplinary session this Friday. The vote will determine whether Mr. Whitfield's continued presence compromises the school's learning environment." That was all. No mention of Cartwright's allegations. No mention of the threats Jamari had received, the slurs, the surveillance, or the nationwide support flooding in. Just one line, one implication. Either he goes, or the silence returns. By 8:00 a.m., the news had spread like wildfire. Students stared at their phones in disbelief. Ethan texted him just 2 words. "They're scared." Within an hour, students were organizing again. This time not in silent protest but in full-throated refusal. Flyers circulated campus. "We stand with Jamari." Social media lit up with the hashtag #NomTheVoteIsUs, shared by students, parents, alumni, and even former teachers who had resigned quietly over the years. The tension on campus was sharp enough to cut through. Jamari walked through the courtyard with his hood pulled low, not out of shame, but strategy. He didn't want the cameras to see the exhaustion on his face. The last 48 hours had been non-stop. Emails, interviews, messages from lawyers offering help pro bono. And now this, the school threatening to erase him entirely in an effort to neutralize the scandal. But what stung wasn't just the betrayal. It was the cowardice. After all the files, the evidence, the protest, the community outpouring, they still had the audacity to weigh his existence against Cartwright's comfort. Like this was a trade, like justice was negotiable. Miss Teller found him between classes, her face tight with concern. "I heard," she whispered, "this isn't due process. It's panic. They're trying to make an example out of you to calm donors. They're choosing the wrong example," Jamari said flatly. By lunch, nearly 200 students had gathered in the quad, forming a circle around Jamari. No chants, no signs, just a collective statement. "We're not backing down." From the center, Jamari stood on the low stone ledge near the old bell tower. His breath curled in the December air, hands trembling slightly, as he held his phone with his speech, not for performance but so he wouldn't unravel under the weight of what he needed to say. "They told me I disrupted this school," he began, voice clear despite the cold. "They told me I politicized Christmas, that I turned a holiday into a protest. But here's the truth. This was never just about Christmas. It was about how you are treated when you don't look like the tradition they're trying to preserve." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "They said I made it about race." No. They made it about race when they watched me decorate alone, when they rejected my essay, when they erased students before me, when they kept files filled with bias and called it discipline. He paused, scanning the faces, some tearful, others fiery. "They're voting to see if I still belong here. But let me say this clearly. I never asked to belong to a lie. I belong to truth. I belong to the ones they tried to silence. And I'm not asking for your permission. I'm taking my place." Applause erupted, not wild or chaotic, but powerful, rhythmic, unstoppable. As Jamari stepped down, Ethan caught him by the sleeve. That was legendary, but Jamari just nodded, eyes distant. "They're still gonna vote." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows across campus, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled through the faculty entrance. Inside, the full board, summoned early to prepare for the vote. Tension pulsed in every footstep. Margaret Henley, face stiff with unease, carried a folder under her arm titled Public Sentiment Review. Another board member carried an envelope labeled Anonymous Legal Threats. The school was quiet, but not still. Inside the main building, whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Teachers closed their doors. Admins huddled behind glass walls. Students leaned in near lockers, watching, waiting. Then the message came. Jamari was summoned to the conference room. Not through email, not through a teacher. A uniformed security officer handed him the printed note directly. "Board requests your presence. Immediate." The walk from the main hallway to the boardroom felt longer than usual. Every step dragged under the weight of knowing his future. His education, his reputation, his entire public identity was about to be debated by people who had never once called him by name, until now. He entered the room. No smiles, no greetings, just chairs arranged in a half circle, a single seat at the center. Cartwright wasn't present, but his voice echoed in the documents on every board member's lap. His injunction, his accusations, his legacy of manipulation reduced to printouts and polite murmurs. Margaret spoke first. "Mr. Whitfield, thank you for coming. We wanted to give you the opportunity to address the board directly before the vote." Jamari looked around the room. Half the faces were unreadable. The rest were guarded. Only one, Miss Cho, the newest member, met his gaze with something close to conviction. "I've already said everything," he replied. "But say it here," Cho urged gently. "Not for them. For you." Jamari took a breath, then another. "I'm not here to defend myself," he said, "because what I've done doesn't require defense. I told the truth. I shared a lived experience. I made visible what this school worked hard to keep invisible. That's not a crime. That's clarity." One board member shifted uncomfortably. "You can vote me out," he continued, "but you can't unwrite what's been exposed. You can't unsee what was hidden, and you can't erase me without confirming everything I said from the beginning." Silence blanketed the room. Then Margaret leaned forward. "We'll deliberate now. You'll be notified before tomorrow's announcement." Jamari nodded once and stood to leave. As he reached for the doorknob, a voice behind him, one that hadn't spoken all meeting, finally broke the silence. "Wait," the man said. "Before we vote, there's something Jamari needs to see." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder labeled, "Cartwright, Sealed Witness Deposition." The room seemed to shrink once the folder labeled, "Cartwright, Sealed Witness Deposition," was placed on the table. Jamari remained standing near the door, his hand still hovering over the knob, as if leaving were still an option. It wasn't, not anymore. Whatever lived inside that folder had already changed the temperature of the room. Margaret Henley didn't open it right away. She looked around the table first, as if gauging whether the board was prepared to finally stop pretending. "Before we proceed," she said carefully, "there is a statement we need to hear." Mr. Cartwright requested to address the board one last time. The door at the far end opened. Cartwright walked in with the confidence of someone who believed the room owed him something. His shoulders were squared, his jaw set. He didn't look at Jamari at first. He placed a leather briefcase beside his chair and sat, crossing his legs with deliberate calm. When he finally lifted his gaze, it wasn't remorse that flickered there. It was defiance. "This school," Cartwright began, without waiting for permission, "was not built for chaos. It was built on tradition, discipline, and excellence. And excellence requires standards." Jamari felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine. Margaret interjected. "Mr. Cartwright, this is not an opening statement. We are reviewing allegations of misconduct. And I'm responding to a witch hunt," Cartwright snapped, his composure thinning. "A media frenzy fueled by a teenager who mistook attention for truth." Jamari turned fully now. "You mean a student who told the truth you tried to bury?" Cartwright smirked. "Truth?" He laughed once sharply. "This school wasn't built for kids like him. That's the truth no one wants to say out loud." The words landed with a dull, devastating thud. A few board members inhaled sharply. One parent representative whispered, "Did he really just—"
He did, Margaret said quietly.
Cartwright leaned forward. "Look around. Our donors, our alumni. This institution thrives because it protects a certain culture." Jamari Whitfield disrupted that. Not because he was oppressed, but because he was undisciplined. He used race as a shield. Jamari's voice stayed even. "You used it as a weapon." The room erupted, not with shouting but with overlapping objections, murmurs, chairs scraping back. The board was splitting in real time. On one side were those who still clung to the idea that Cartwright's longevity excused his cruelty. On the other were members who finally saw what had been enabled for decades. Then Miss Cho spoke. She hadn't raised her voice once during the entire ordeal. She didn't need to. "There's a recording," she said. The room stilled.
A what?
Cartwright asked, eyes narrowing. Miss Cho connected her laptop to the screen mounted on the wall. "A former faculty member came forward yesterday. She recorded a conversation 3 years ago after being warned to stop coddling certain students." She pressed play. Cartwright's voice filled the room. Casual, unguarded, cruel. "They're always looking for special treatment," the recording said. "These black kids come in thinking the rules bend for them. If you don't shut that down early, they'll turn the whole place into a grievance factory." A gasp rippled through the room. The recording continued. "You isolate them, document everything, and eventually they remove themselves. Saves the school the trouble." Jamari felt his chest tighten, not in shock, but in recognition. This was the system he had walked through without knowing its blueprint. Cartwright stood abruptly. "That's out of context." "There is no context," Margaret replied, her voice steady but furious. "That excuses racism." The door to the conference room burst open. 2 parents stepped in, faces flushed, eyes blazing. Security hesitated, then stepped aside. The dam had broken. "My son was expelled under you," one father said, pointing at Cartwright. "You called him aggressive for asking why his essay was graded lower." "My daughter left this school in tears," another mother added. "You told her she'd never fit the culture." The boardroom was no longer insulated. The outside world had found its way in. Cartwright looked around, his confidence finally cracking. "This is a mob," he said. "You're letting emotion replace reason." "No," Jamari said softly. "We're letting truth replace fear." Silence fell again, thicker this time. "Final." Margaret closed the deposition folder without opening it. "We've heard enough," she said. "The board will vote now. No speeches, no ceremony." Each board member received a slip of paper. 2 options printed in stark black letters. A. Expel Jamari Whitfield for disruptive conduct. B. Terminate Douglas Cartwright for racial misconduct and abuse of authority. Jamari stood motionless as pen scratched paper. He didn't pray. He didn't bargain. He simply watched, knowing that whatever happened next would echo far beyond him. One by one, the slips were folded and placed into a wooden box at the center of the table. No one spoke, not even Cartwright. Margaret reached for the box. As she unfolded the first ballot, the room held its breath. Every future in that silence. The gymnasium had never looked like this before. What had once been a flat backdrop for the annual Holiday Lights Assembly was now transformed into a space that felt alive, vibrant, multi-layered, and unmistakably real. Strings of paper lanterns swung gently from the rafters, but not just red and green ones. Their shapes nodded to every story: gold and blue lanterns for Hanukkah, kanaras with candles in rich hues, monochrome patterns from Kwanzaa, handmade daya jars flickering faintly on tables, and ornaments that reflected the snow-laced sunlight filtering through tall windows. Students milled about, voices, low but full of wonder, tracing their eyes across traditions not only familiar but newly respected. This was no longer a forced holiday production. This was community.
In the center of the room stood the towering Christmas tree. Taller than two teachers stacked on tiptoes, its branches hung heavy with ornaments from every culture on campus. Paper cranes from Lunar New Year celebrations nestled beside hand-painted stars from Eid. Jamari walked up to the tree, feeling the weight of months pressing in behind him, and the promise of tomorrow lifting forward. In his hand was a single ornament, a simple, circular piece of wood his grandmother had carved, etched with a scene from their apartment back home. Mismatched lights, battered wrapping paper, and love stitched together in gold threads of memory. He hung it near the top, first among many yet to come, the token of a story that once felt invisible now, a lasting part of the school's landscape. The crowd hushed as he stepped back, the room misted with emotion that wasn't just nostalgia or holiday spirit, but recognition. The kind that seeps into bones and settles there. Months had passed since the protest, the leaks, the news cycles, the boardroom votes, that seemed to stretch like years compressed into days. Cartwright had finally been officially terminated. The board's decision, once whispered about in closed offices, was now etched into the consciousness of every student, teacher, and parent, not as an act of triumphal vengeance, but as a declaration that systemic bias could no longer hide behind tradition. His lawsuit had collapsed when his own coded files were released publicly. Legal experts called it one of the clearest cases of racially motivated misconduct in the school's history. Cartwright's name, once uttered with authority, now passed between students like a cautionary tale of entitlement and arrogance. Early that morning, a scholarship package arrived for Jamari. Not just any award, but a full sponsorship from a national education foundation that had tracked his story from the beginning. It was framed as an activism and leadership scholarship, with a stipend for college and funding to support community projects. Seeing it, Jamari felt the same knot in his chest that had tightened after the silent protest, that precise blend of disbelief and quiet determination. It meant the seed he planted had started to grow roots, not just in the school but beyond. The gym buzzed as students prepared to begin the ceremony. A new banner had been unfurled along one wall. Diversity Leadership Council, founded. It was the first of its kind at the school, a body comprised of students, faculty, and parents committed to ensuring that every voice felt seen, heard, and safe. Some of the students who once ignored Jamari's presence now stood beside him, sharing excited whispers about future events, inclusive curriculum discussions, and mentorship programs they wanted to build together. One by one, speakers stepped up to the microphone. A senior who had once laughed at Jamari on the first day now spoke with humility about understanding her privilege. A teacher who had remained silent earlier that year apologized publicly, tears glistening in her eyes as she admitted she had taken her comfort for granted. Parents stood as well, some with trembling voices, reconciling how their assumptions had contributed to the pain of others. This was not just a holiday celebration, it was an unearthing, an acknowledgement of what was hidden and the courage it took to tell the truth. When Jamari stepped up to speak, silence flowed over the room like a tide. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words he chose were simple, resonant, reflections of deep struggle and hard-won perspective. Season's greetings, he began, voice rich with emotion. Not because this moment is easy, but because truth is a season worth celebrating. We gather now not to erase our differences, but to honor them, to learn from them, to understand that joy can be many things. Joy is not singular. It doesn't belong to just one story, one holiday, or one tradition. It belongs to every student who has ever been told they don't belong, and to every adult who learns with them. A hush settled, thick and reverent. Students nodded,
Teachers blinked back tears. Parents exchanged glances that said everything they hadn't said months ago. And then came a twist no one saw coming. As Jamari stepped down, a woman in the back row rose slowly. Her face was familiar. Someone he had seen in the crowd at the protest months ago, holding a sign that read, "Our stories belong here too." She approached the microphone without hesitation. "My name is Dr. Elena Sawaris," she said, voice firm yet warm. "I'm a representative of the foundation that awarded Jamari his scholarship, but I'm also an educator in another district. I came here because I was moved, not just by his words, but by how this community chose transformation over silence." She paused, gathering the room's attention. "And today we want to offer something more than recognition. We want to partner with the Diversity Leadership Council to create a national exchange program where students from different backgrounds can share their cultures, their histories, and their truths with school communities across the country." Gasps of excitement spread like wildfire. "What this school has done," she continued, "is not just rare, it's necessary, and we want to help amplify it." Jamari watched the room erupt, not in celebratory noise, but in tears, hugs, and plans. What felt impossible months ago was now reality. The community, once fractured and rigid, now brimmed with possibility. Just as the ceremony began to ebb into laughter, photos, and shared stories, Jamari's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't want to check it, not now, not amidst this fragile bloom of hope. But curiosity stirred him forward. His mother leaned in, whispering, "Whatever it is, it can wait." But the glow from her eyes made him pause. It wasn't urgency she saw. It was encouragement. He opened the message, his breath caught. "Anonymous. You're close, too close. They're not done with you yet." No name, no signature, just the same threat he'd received months ago. A reminder that victory was provisional, not guaranteed. Jamari set the phone down and inhaled deeply. His mother, noticing the flicker of worry in his eyes, squeezed his shoulder gently. "Come back," she said. "This moment belongs to you just as much." He turned toward the stage, toward the students laughing and teachers wiping tears, toward the tree he had helped transform. His gaze traveled over every ornament, every bead of light, every story now woven into this room like a tapestry of truth. Just as he exhaled, relieved and rooted in the present, movement at the back of the gym caught his eye. It was a student he hadn't expected to see, a former bully whose sneers had once echoed in hallways and social media chatter. The boy approached slowly, head lowered, eyes clear but glistening. When he stopped in front of Jamari, his voice trembled. "Jamari," he began, barely above a whisper, I want to help. I want to join what you're building." The room seemed to hold its breath. As Jamari opened his mouth to respond, the speaker system crackled, and an urgent announcement boomed through the gym. "Attention all students and faculty. An unplanned district inspection has just been requested, one that could reverse recent policies. All assemblies are to conclude immediately." The festive atmosphere froze in place, and a new tension rippled through every heart in the room. If you believe no child should ever be silenced because of their skin color, type yes in the comments. What would you do if your school tried to erase your story? Make sure to subscribe for more true, powerful stories that uncover what others try to hide. Because when one voice rises against injustice, it gives courage to thousands more.